Ever tried to upgrade your workstation, only to open the box and discover the drive you thought would be a game changer feels underwhelming? I've been there. A glossy photo on a product page, a handful of buzzwords, and then the reality of loading massive projects or swapping large data sets takes forever. That's why I'm doing this deep dive on Intel's latest SOLIDIGM SSD, the D7P5520 series with 3.84 terabytes of space. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon, and I'm going to walk through what actually matters when you slot this thing into a real-world system. First off, let's talk about the type of user who ends up staring at the specs and wondering, do I really need 3.84 terabytes of PCIe 4.04 bandwidth? If you're a content creator who works with 8K footage, a data scientist juggling terabytes of model data, or a game developer testing massive texture packs, the answer is a solid yes. Those workloads generate huge sequential reads and writes, and the D7P5520 advertises a full PCIe 4.04 lane interface, which theoretically means you can tap close to 8 GB per second throughput. In practice, I ran a series of real-world tasks, copying a 1.2 terabytes raw video archive from a USB 3.2 dock, rendering a 30-minute sequence in DaVinci Resolve, and training a medium-sized neural network in TensorFlow. Across those three scenarios, the drive consistently shaved off 3,040% of the time compared with a legacy SATA SSD I had on hand. That's not just a numbers game, those minutes add up when you're on a deadline. Now, what about the everyday user? If you're primarily browsing the web, editing documents, and watching a few movies, you probably won't notice much difference over a decent SATA SSD or even an entry-level PCIe 3.0 drive. The extra bandwidth is most visible when the drive is under sustained load, which is exactly why it feels underwhelming for light workloads. So if your typical use case is email, Office, Netflix, you could spend a lot less on a smaller capacity and still feel perfectly snappy. One of the hidden trade-offs with this model is its physical size and the cooling considerations. The 2.5-inch form factor fits most desktop bays, but the drive's controller runs hot when pushed to its limits. In my test rig, a mid-tower case with limited airflow temperatures peaking at 68 C after a continuous 2-hour copy test were observed. That didn't cause throttling, but it's a point to keep in mind if you're planning a cramped build or a small form factor PC. Adding a modest heatsink or ensuring the drive sits behind a case fan will keep it in a comfortable zone and preserve its performance headroom. Another practical aspect is the weight. At roughly 150 grams, it isn't the lightest thing on the market, which matters only if you're swapping drives frequently, say on a laptop you're constantly reimaging. For a desktop or a workstation that stays put, the weight is negligible. But if you're buying a laptop that claims to be ultra-portable and you're looking at an SSD as part of your upgrade path, you might want to compare against lighter M.2 solutions that sit directly on the motherboard. Let's address the big question, is the price justified? Intel positions this drive as a premium offering, and the 3.84 terabytes capacity certainly pushes the cost upward. However, the value doesn't come from the raw storage alone, it's the combination of endurance and the drive's 3D NAND TLC architecture. Intel's engineering team has tuned the firmware to spread more evenly across the entire capacity, which translates into a higher total bytes written (TBW) rating than many competing drives in the same class. For someone who writes terabytes of data daily, think of video editors ingesting raw footage, or a render farm node that writes out massive cache files. The endurance figure means the drive will last longer before you have to consider a replacement. On the flip side, the D7P5520 lacks a few niceties that some of its rivals ship with. There's no integrated hardware encryption module, which matters if you handle sensitive client data and need AES-256 encryption without relying on software solutions. Also, Intel's warranty for this model is the standard 3-year term, whereas a few competing brands push 5 years on similar capacity drives. If you're risk-averse and want the longest possible safety net, you might lean toward those alternatives. Who should skip this drive? If you're building a budget gaming PC, for instance, You'll likely get more bang for your buck with a 1TB or 2TB PCIe 3.0 drive that still offers excellent FPS level performance. The extra capacity would sit idle, and the PCIe 4.0 bandwidth isn't a critical factor for most games, which tend to load assets in bursts rather than sustained streams. Similarly, if you're a laptop user with limited space and no room for a 2.5-inch bay, the D7 P5520 simply won't fit your form factor. Who should buy it? Professionals who need massive, fast, and reliable storage without worrying about hitting a capacity ceiling. The drive shines in a workstation where you can dedicate a dedicated bay.